Of course, it's really an honor to be invited to Bird Chat. I'm so glad that this has worked out, and especially that it's worked out at a time in my life where um, my work life and my personal world are kind of realigning very well and converging around birds, which obviously, Deborah, we go way back, so I know you know how meaningful that is to me. But it's been a great journey in the last few months to see that materialize. So I'm going to be talking today a little bit about the role of zoos and bird conservation. And really, my goal is that by the end of this talk, you have a new perspective on zoos and aquaria and accredited AZA institutions. Hopefully, you all already have a good sense of what those institutions do for conservation, but I'm going to provide you with a few more tangible examples of what we're doing at ZooMiami within my department that I'm a member of. Before we get into that, though, I do want to back up a little bit. You heard a little bit about my background already from Deborah because we go way back, but I want to talk a little about my journey and how I got to this particular career field of interest into this role. And it really, as Deborah alluded to, started in my childhood. I was very fortunate to have my parents, who you see on the screen there, next to me on that rock in El Yunque, in Puerto Rico, where I was born. Um, to really guide me and instill in me this passion for nature, for being outdoors, for camping, outdoor recreation, whatever form it would take. We were just very enthusiastic about getting outside as much as we could every weekend. There's stories of me as an infant being strapped into a little backpack and going on to my first hike in El Yunque when I was just a few months old, while my dad was helping to take photos for a herpetological expedition out there. So it's really, in a lot of ways, it feels like predestination to end up here in this role. And truly, those experiences allowed me to grow a deeper appreciation for the outdoors than I think a lot of people have the privilege of getting that sort of exposure at an early age. It's quite rare. That then turned into a realization that, as I just said, that's a privilege that not a lot of people have. And as a result of that, we have a growing disconnect with nature, especially among our young people, but it spans all generations. I work with folks from all different walks of life. And the truth is, this has been happening for a long time. It's not just the video games, although they're probably not helping. There's been a very deep rooted misunderstanding of the role of humans in the context of ecosystems, and that's led to us growing further and further apart and not really understanding how our actions impact those ecosystems. So once I started to realize that in middle school, I started to take my enthusiasm from just going out there and enjoying these spaces myself to going out there and really protecting them, and not only protecting them myself, but doing everything that I could to inspire other people to also protect them. So I actually got involved with an effort through my dad again, who was helping to start up this incredible nature center in Central Florida in Polk County. Probably, I would guess many of you have been there if you've been to the Circle B Bar Reserve. We were actually part of the group that was helping to document all of the incredible fauna that was out on that property well before it actually got turned into a public park. And once we did actually, once the county did progress into starting the nature center, they were kind enough to allow me to host different educational programs out there for other young students and teens to come out and learn a little bit about this really unique suite of ecosystems that we had on the property, and also what they could do to get involved. And that included dragging along a bunch of high school students to pull out water hyacinths from the marsh and getting down and dirty in the water. And it was a really formative experience for me to get to see all the nuts and bolts of not only the resource management that was happening at that location, but also how they were interpreting that resource management to the public, how people were coming to experience this new site that I had had the privilege of getting to know intimately for many years before the gates were ever opened, and to really learn a lot about what it takes to motivate people to care and to transform that care into action. Along the way, though, I learned that it wasn't enough to just pull water hyacinth out of the wetland. Unfortunately, a lot of the factors that drive invasive species, that drive these large systemic changes that we're facing, like climate change, these are factors that, while we can all contribute to addressing, they are systemic issues that require really broad scale intervention. And that actually fueled my interest in advocacy and outreach. And if you look at some of my academic journey, you'll see that I started my undergraduate degree very interested in wildlife biology. At one point, I actually thought I was going to be a wildlife veterinarian, also probably working in a zoo, but in a very different capacity. And I realized through the first couple of years of my undergraduate work that I really wanted to be the type of scientist, a conservationist who wasn't just documenting extinctions, but was actively preventing them in my work. And to be able to do that, I realized it was really important to go back to some of those roots of my volunteering. We have to mobilize people, and especially we have to make sure that people are mobilized and getting in the ears of the folks who have the power to make these broader decisions, which is why I'm really thrilled that you all are talking about the defunding risk to the USGS. It is a huge concern for me in my work right now, and a huge concern to so many federal workers who are truly doing their best to protect these incredible species, and potentially losing their jobs in the next few weeks. So that's what really made me realize how important advocacy and outreach was. It goes beyond just inspiring people to care about things. It really is about making sure that people are talking about them at the highest levels of influence and taking action. But as I went down that path, I found myself missing being outside, and I love DC to this day. It's one of my favorite cities. I love going to the Hill. I love meeting my members of Congress and lobbying when I can. I'm actually planning a wildlife conservation themed lobby day for later this year, but I was really missing just being outside and reconnecting with the birds that sparked this journey in the first place. And that's part of what led me to the Cape Florida Banding Station here in Miami, really giving me an outlet to reconnect with my roots as I was doing my PhD research, which was so focused on government and policy and fully a desk study. I got to do relatively limited field work, and the field work that I did was talking to people and understanding their value systems. But I wasn't, intentionally looking at birds or studying them in any real way. So I was missing that. And fortunately, this opportunity at ZooMiami as their first ever Avian Conservation Programs Manager opened up at just the right time when I was looking. So that's how I got here. Let's talk a little bit about what I do now. So I want to begin with sort of getting us on the same page about what a zoo does overall. I think for most of us, when we think about a zoo, we immediately are thinking about the collection animals, right? You're thinking about the giraffes and the lions that you can go see when you go walk around. So that's a pretty basic. That's how most zoos kind of market themselves in a lot of ways too. Certainly it's the biggest driver of revenue. But zoos, and especially accredited zoological institutions, so I definitely challenge you if you are thinking about engaging with a particular zoo or zoo-like establishment, looking into their accreditation status with the AZA, and really looking at if they're walking the walk of conservation. It's very easy to say that we have giraffes and elephants and lions and all these big megafauna in captivity for reasons of conservation, and then forget to actually invest in protecting the spaces that they need in the wild and getting to understand that species and what it needs in the wild. It's not enough to just have a collection, and a credible zoo is investing in conservation in addition to maintaining an incredible, robust, thriving population of collection animals that can help people like you and me who may not have the privilege of going to see all of these incredible species in the wild to still connect with them and fall in love with them and understand why they need protection. So we have the collection, we're investing in conservation, and all of that comes together in what AZA now refers to as SAFE programs, which are efforts to save animals from extinction. Because again, it's not about treating zoos as life rafts, it's about treating zoos as a way of investing back into the ecosystems and the habitats that these animals need to thrive in the wild. At ZooMiami, our mission is to inspire people through engaging experiences to preserve nature in South Florida and across the globe. And hopefully, if you've ever been to the zoo, we've succeeded in that mission. If not, I hope you'll come back and try us again and let me know when you're coming so we can try a little harder. But certainly, this is what we try to do. We try to create really engaging exhibit spaces. We try to maintain a really exciting and unique way of keeping collection animals on habitat where you can see animals without fences and chain links in between you and the animal, but through really creative ways of essentially providing an opportunity to experience them in a somewhat similar way that you might experience them in the wild. And of course, we want to inspire folks who come and fall in love with our gorillas to also, for example, recycle their old cell phones that we are not continuing to contribute to the factors that are driving that species to extinction through rare earth mineral mining. And you'll notice that we focus across the globe, I think is very obvious to a lot of people because most of you have probably never been to a zoo that only features your backyard animals. For that, you probably just go to your backyard. You want to see something exotic and different. But it is our mission also to preserve nature in South Florida. So a lot of what we do in the department that I'm in, which is conservation and research, really speaks to this piece of our mission. And I would generally describe our work as being divided up into 3 buckets, which I'll give you some concrete examples for each of these 3 in the rest of the presentation. So the first bucket is really to support partners that are working to conserve wildlife all around the globe. And this is obviously a very wide-ranging mandate, but truly what this speaks to is the knowledge that we can't be everywhere. As much as I might love to be sent out on location to all of these cool places, I physically cannot. And more importantly, I probably shouldn't be, because the people who are already there, who have been working to protect that species for generations, are the people who are best equipped to do it. So our role in the department is to find ways that we can continue to further support those efforts, help them to scale those efforts up if that's what's needed, and just provide a sounding board as they encounter different challenges. Our second component of our work is to collaborate with keepers to increase our conservation impact. So we're constantly looking for ways that we can connect with our keeper staff who are helping to keep our collection animals healthy, and really challenge them to think about, what does this animal need in the wild? And what can we as a zoological establishment do to promote that more responsibly and to engage guests around? And are there ways that we can foster informational exchanges, for example, with people who might be encountering these animals in a very different context, like if they run a rehab facility where this species is native, and they could really benefit from the keeper and veterinary knowledge that we have on staff at the zoo from interacting with that species every day. And then the third component, which is probably the one that I think most people are most excited for tonight, is to design our research projects that really help to fill critical knowledge gaps in conservation. And a lot of this pillar of our work is focused within Florida. There are definitely cases where that is not exclusively true, but it is beneficial to us being based in South Florida to be able to manage some research projects right in our backyard. It makes it a lot easier, certainly. So let's talk about how we support partners. One of the things that we can do as a zoological establishment is invest some of our revenue in supplementing the funding that they might already be getting from other sources. For example, in the international conservation world, if you were not aware, a decent amount of funding for international wildlife conservation actually comes from sources like the USAID program funding. A lot of those grants go directly to conservation and habitat restoration work. And the zoo can really help to get people the rest of the way to their funding need. We also collaborate on conservation breeding programs. So I wanted to touch on this a little bit in the context of our work with red siskin. They're also known as cardenalito in their native Venezuela. And as a zoological establishment, many of you probably know that zoos also have a responsibility to manage our populations across all zoos, in a sustainable manner. So we don't want to be going out and wild harvesting an individual from the wild. We want to be able to sustain a population that is genetically diverse for many generations and make sure that if another zoo on the other side of the country really wants to get involved in red siskin conservation, that we have red siskins here and we don't have to take them out of a rapidly declining wild population in Venezuela. So the way that we collaborate on this is not only do we meet frequently with our partners in Venezuela who are actually breeding them in the country and receiving them from confiscations. The story of the Cardenalito is actually a very interesting one. This is a bird that is in many ways a symbol of Venezuela, especially in the region of the country that their historic range was most concentrated in. They have a beautiful song, as you can see on the screen, just really brightly colored bird. And unfortunately, those bright colors, as often happens, got them into trouble. And at some point, people found out that by crossbreeding this bird with a standard domestic yellow canary, that is how you can actually produce a red canary. So if you've ever been to a pet shop and you've seen a red canary, somewhere in its lineage, it was crossed with a red siskin. And unfortunately, that trade was highly unregulated for a very long time, and it led to rapid declines of their population. So our partners in Venezuela are helping to bring that population back. They're helping to refine best practices in conservation breeding, where we can breed them in a more in a safe environment where they won't be at risk of poachers. And we as ZooMiami are also breeding red siskins. At this stage, we're not ready to reintroduce any of these into the wild. That is what our partners in Venezuela are working towards. But it does give us an opportunity to contribute to a growing body of knowledge of what this bird needs to thrive and succeed in the wild. It gives us an opportunity to contribute to research into their breeding behavior. And it also allows us to contribute to managing that thriving, genetically diverse population within the United States for zoos that are interested in also getting involved in this work. In addition, one of the things that I find really fun about being at ZooMiami in particular, especially as a Latina, is that projects like these give us an opportunity to facilitate international outreach. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next project I'm going to highlight as well. But I think this one's a really interesting case because if you've been to Miami, you might be familiar with a neighborhood called Doral. And this is actually the neighborhood where a lot of Venezuelans, especially recent Venezuelan immigrants, have come to establish themselves and build a new life for themselves. And for many of them, for many years, when we had the red siskin out on display in, ironically, in the office that I work in, very coincidentally, people, especially Venezuelans, would walk into the building and they would completely ignore this giant aquarium that we have, a floor to ceiling aquarium. It's gorgeous, has giant arapaima in it. They would just block that out completely because they saw the Cardenalito and they remembered it. I mean, this bird shows up in our Christmas music, in my Christmas music as a Puerto Rican, is actually has co-opted the story of the Cardenalito from Venezuela in some cases. So it's a very powerful bird to reconnect people who have been displaced through political turmoil, through any number of other factors that have led to them immigrating to the United States, trying to find a new life, but also, as I can certainly attest to, feeling a little bit homesick. So what we can do as a zoo is provide an outlet for people to learn about this bird back home, to contribute to their conservation, and to really continue talking about the issues that matter to them in new and creative ways. So I also mentioned that we collaborate with keepers, and one of the great examples of this is through our work with harpy eagles. If you've been to ZooMiami or you're familiar with our story, you know harpies are a critical part of the zoo's history. Certainly is deeply related to perhaps one of the most recognizable members of our staff, Ron McGill, who really championed this work and even actually was a critical part of getting the harpy eagle to be designated as the national bird of Panama. But even beyond that work that he did decades ago, we are maintaining that relationship with our counterparts at facilities in Panama. And even very interestingly, one of our first harpy chicks that was ever born and raised at ZooMiami is actually now an ambassador harpy eagle at Summit Park in Panama City. So if you ever go to Panama and you find yourself with a free afternoon in the city, you can go check out Panama, that's her name, in her wonderful, huge habitat out there in Panama, and have a little bit of a connection to Miami as well while you're out there. So what we're able to provide, because harpy eagles were so few and far between for a very long time in Panama, and certainly not frequently encountered in zoos, in even rehab facilities, because their numbers were so low, ZooMiami is really able to fill a critical piece of the equation by providing opportunities for keepers to learn from each other, for our veterinarians to consult with each other, to make sure that eagles like Panama are having the best possible quality of life and standard of care out there, but also to collaborate with rehabbers, for example, and make sure that they are up to date on the newest information of how best to care for these birds. And we can learn something from them as well through those interactions. So I mentioned already that the harpy eagle was not only an example of these kind of exchanges, but also where ZooMiami has helped to play a role in elevating the profile of that species within its native range. And certainly this bird's designation as a national bird has done a huge amount of good for people's awareness of the harpy eagle. I'm in contact with some researchers in Panama who have been studying this over the last several decades. Sort of touches on information exchange, but also how can we really change the game for conservation for these species. And the last bucket I promised I would touch about is designing research. And in particular, we focus on studying local species most frequently to understand trends. We work with researchers from lots of different backgrounds to deepen our knowledge about these different species in our own backyards. And we really try to apply research to real world problems wherever we can. Our department is called Conservation and Research. So when we design a research project, it's not just because we think that would be an interesting thing to know about the animal, it's because it has some meaningful conservation impact. So as an example, and I'll share a couple of non-bird examples in a moment as well, because I'm sorry, I'm that type of person. I'm a naturalist, not exclusively an ornithologist. But as a bird example, you have all certainly experienced a pretty big change in the Florida birding world in the last few years with the return of flamingos. For a long time, this was considered to not be a species that was going to ever return to Florida. It didn't seem very likely. And even under the Fish and Wildlife, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission's sort of designations, it's still not fully considered native to Florida, even though they were historically here, but they were extirpated in the last century and weren't present for such a long time. And their habitat experienced so much deterioration and modification that researchers really believed flamingos were a thing of the past for us. However, we've seen in recent years that flamingos that get blown here by hurricanes, or maybe are even traveling of their own volition, are staying. And that's really exciting. And I think it has certainly caused a buzz for birders who have been chasing them all around the state. But we're seeing them stay and grow their populations, and even in some cases starting to exhibit behaviors that indicate that they might be flocking, roosting together, and maybe even trying to nest in Florida. So our team at ZooMiami, in addition to a great number of collaborative partners from Audubon, Florida, from the Audubon Nature Institute in Louisiana, from all across the country, and even university partners as well, have been studying this return of the flamingo and trying to understand, what's actually happening here. Are they going to successfully reestablish their population? It's probably a little bit too early to tell all the nuts and bolts of this, but what we do know is that they're certainly staying longer than we would expect any vagrant to just hang around. They are finding the food sources that they need, perhaps not the nesting locations that they need just yet. Maybe they have, and we just haven't found them yet. But there's definitely an opportunity here that wasn't there before. And what that allows us to do is open up the conversation about what kinds of protections do flamingos in Florida need? What kinds of habitat restoration in Everglades National Park, for example, might help them really be able to settle here to nest and reproduce successfully? Because that's ultimately the greatest test of whether a species is going to survive in a new location, is whether it can breed successfully or not and have its chicks breed again. So we're really closely monitoring the situation and trying to do everything that we can to elevate the profile of flamingos in the state. That has included our foundation team really stepping up our advocacy in Tallahassee to get the flamingo recognized as a state bird. I know I grew up in Central Florida. We can talk about scrub jays later, but it is definitely an emblematic species of our state. And it's an exciting time to be involved at sort of this nexus of the research that's going on to understand what's happening with flamingos in Florida, and also this advocacy piece through our foundation to figure out how do we take this animal that has always been sort of the public image, certainly of South Florida, but many other parts of our state. Probably the image that a lot of folks from up north might have of flamingos, or might have of Florida, or pink lawn flamingos, and bringing that to the forefront as a conservation story, not just, this cute little jokey thing that we do in Florida, but a real species in real need of conservation. So some of the projects that I am working on, in addition to those 3 that I've already shared with you, where we're partnering with others all around the world, I'm also getting to develop my own research projects. So I'll talk about each of these a little bit. The first one we'll talk about are white crown pigeons, which is probably not a species that many of you have thought about too much, even here, which is kind of one of the only parts of the continental United States where you can even see white crown pigeons. Most folks in South Florida and Miami-Dade County have probably never realized they've encountered one. But they are a state-listed threatened species. They're found throughout the Caribbean, and in the continental United States, only found in the southeastern part of the state. They are relatively secretive birds, despite being quite large. And also, I would say, very noisy when they take off. So if you are ever down in Miami and you hear what sounds like a pigeon breaking every branch possible, it might have been a white crown pigeon. They are not the most graceful at takeoff. And they're extremely sensitive to changes in habitat availability and climate change. They have a very specialized diet. These are not, feral rock pigeons that we're talking about. They actually particularly prefer poison wood, which, as the name would suggest, is not necessarily the average person's favorite thing to plant in their backyard, unfortunately. And that has led to a lot of declines in white crown pigeons. But also, very importantly, they nest on mangrove islands, which are increasingly under threat of sea level rise, of extreme stochastic events like really strong hurricanes that might wipe out entire colonies and maybe even an entire mangrove key if the storm is strong enough. So what we've seen is that their population seems to be very responsive to these issues, some of which we can control by, for example, encouraging people to plant poisonwood or strangler fig or some of these other fruiting trees that they really rely on, and also things that we are probably not going to be able to change in the short to near term. Mangrove islands are going to likely shift because of the impacts of climate change. But another interesting thing about white crown pigeons in Florida is that for a very long time, we believed them to be migratory quite strongly. In fact, as much as 94% of the population was thought to leave Miami-Dade County and spend its winters in either the Bahamas or Cuba. And we thought there were very few birds that would be resident year-round. We also thought they would breed exclusively in the Keys, in the Florida Keys. and maybe the coastal Everglades at the southernmost tip of Everglades National Park. However, it seems like more and more we're encountering white-crowned pigeons in the winter months when they're supposed to be in Cuba or in the Bahamas, here in Miami-Dade County. More and more people are planting strangler fig and other fruiting trees that white-crowned pigeons really rely on to reproduce successfully and to just deem a habitat suitable. And even out at the Cape Florida Banding Station, we have encountered a couple of juvenile white-crowned pigeons, which, if we are to believe the existing literature about where they breed, are a little bit too far from the Keys to have flown there on their own. So my research is going to be investigating how they are reacting to these different changes in habitat availability, and sadly also to some of the pressures that they might encounter on their wintering grounds. In the Bahamas, they are a highly prized sport hunting species. So as you can see, that's actually a photo from a previous researcher's work in the Bahamas. Or they are really severely hunted in those winter months while they're there. So could that hunting pressure also be driving them to stick around in Miami-Dade County where they're not experiencing that same pressure? Maybe. We'll see. That's the whole point of this project. And we're actually just starting that up in the next few weeks. So hopefully I'll be able to share updates later on, but we'll be banning them during the hottest, stickiest months of the summer. So please send positive vibes my way. I will need them, and especially cool vibes if you can. The other piece of my work is a
Steffanie, we lost you for a minute. It looks like we lost Steffanie for a moment.
We'll try to get her back.
She'll be back. Oh, she can't unmute? Okay, she says she can't unmute.
Okay, she's not a host, co-host.
Okay, I'll make her a co-host again. Okay, there she goes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Now you're back.
No, I mean, no need for you to apologize. I apologize for Florida doing its typical summer thing. We've got a fun little thunderstorm rolling through right now, and I just lost everything.
Okay, well,
So
we were
I
on the
will-
white-crowned pigeon.
We were on the white-crowned pigeon. Fabulous. I'm trying to see if I do have Wi-Fi connectivity back on my computer and can get back on my computer. But for now, I think we've covered white-crowned pigeon, and I was just starting to talk a little bit about our pine rockland bird monitoring work. And I apologize, this is obviously not the ideal scenario. I had visuals wanted to show and share with you, but I can still tell you a little bit of the story of the work that we're doing there. So ZooMiami actually sits on a pretty remarkable piece of property that protects some of the largest remaining stands of pine rockland habitat. For those of you in Central Florida, you've probably heard the story of longleaf pine and how severely impacted it was from logging over decades. The pine rockland is sort of our equivalent of that in South Florida. And it has been very severely deteriorated to the point that there's less than 2% of its historical Interestingly enough, pine rocklands are kind of viewed viewed here in South Florida as the trash habitat if you're a bird nerd. They're kind of known to not be as birdy as some of our other South Florida habitats, like hardwood hammocks that tend to produce more fruit. But there are still a lot of species who do rely on this system. And there were also species that have been extirpated from the region that are specialists in a pine rockland habitat that require that. We're thinking about things like turkey. Wild turkey, for example, really relied on pine rockland systems here in South Florida. Eastern bluebirds relied on that as well. And so many other species, our brown-headed nuthatch too, relied on our pinelands, and unfortunately they're just not available to them anymore in a lot of places. So I have been monitoring pine rocklands at our zoo property to better understand what birds are using this habitat, able to dispel some of these old myths, and also better understand what those species in particular need from our habitat management strategies. All right, it looks like I do have internet back, so I'm going to try. I will need to be made perfect. I'll need to be co-host again.
You are a co-host again. Okay, allow. Can you present?
I'm seeing that she's co-host.
So there are two of me. I need the other one of me to be a co-host.
Okay.
Confusing.
There you go. We're doing it.
Oh,
Okay, there you go. There you go.
All right. Can you guys hear me now through Zoom? Perfect. I think so. Let me leave the meeting so you're not staring at my ceiling on the phone. Oh my goodness. It's being difficult, of course. That's fine. We will press on. And let me share my screen again. So far, what I've found in our pine rocklands at the zoo, and this is actually the graph that you're seeing on the screen is only reflecting through late March, pre a lot of migration movement. But the numbers you see on the right are current as of last week when I last entered data. So we've already observed more than 3,000 individuals representing 72 different species of birds across 32 different families. So it's a lot more diverse than I think the general birding community believes it to be. But I am getting to spend a lot of time getting up close and personal with the system. So it is a place that kind of reveals itself slowly to you. I think it requires some more careful study and observation to appreciate this. But what you can see is that in our winter months, our most common species, probably not too terribly exciting, and probably not too surprising. We have red-bellied woodpeckers in the blue line, gray catbirds, of course, love this system, but very precipitously declined as we got into late March and are already, I'm sure, in your neck of the woods. Common grackles, very common, and right now breeding intensively out there. Northern cardinals are probably our staple species, although we do have a lot of towhee who are now becoming much more active as they're breeding and singing more proactively. And myrtle warblers, or of course, yellow rump warblers, as we know and love them. All right. And then lastly, I want to touch a little bit on the Cape Florida Banding Station. This was established in 2002. It is the longest running southernmost migratory bird banding station in the continental United States. We wear that with pride. And what we've been doing in those 20 years is facilitating training opportunities for South Florida ornithologists, and myself included, as one of the people who has had the opportunity to grow from knowing how to handle birds generally through rehab work and other previous research to now actually being a fully permitted, federally permitted master bander. So it's been a great opportunity. And over the years, it's also been a great source of data with over 49,000 birds having been banded at the station. We're located on Key Biscayne, and it's a great opportunity to study how restoration works in real time as well. So now that I'm at the zoo, I'm continuing my support and volunteering with the station, but also getting to support the station in a more concrete and tangible way through my role at the zoo and continuing to raise the research value of the work we do out there. I did want to briefly highlight a couple other major projects. I know we're running short on time, but I hope you'll give me a little bit of grace given that we did have those technological issues. Again, I apologize. But I would be remiss if I didn't highlight the great work of my colleagues in the Conservation and Research Department. We have a longstanding research program focusing on gopher tortoises, which we have the southernmost population of gopher tortoises, which for a very long time, biologists, like even Fish and Wildlife, didn't want to believe that we had gopher tortoises in South Florida, but they are clearly here. We have a great healthy population right on zoo grounds, and we partner with FWC to make sure that we can properly rehome any tortoises that lose their habitat in South Florida. And what we've learned is that they really live very different lives from the gopher tortoises that I grew up with in Central Florida. Their burrows are completely different. A lot of their behaviors are different. We don't even know how they nest down here because they don't nest the same way that their counterparts further north do. So those are the kinds of mysteries that my colleagues who focus on our gopher tortoises are trying to unravel through their research. I also have another coworker who is working on imperiled pollinators and also other really unique bugs and critters that you find out in the pine rockland. We've actually had several species discovered at or first scientifically described at our zoo in the pine rockland habitat, including the Miami tiger beetle, which is a critically endangered species, as well as the Miami trapdoor spider, which is a really fascinating project. But of course, a lot of people here in Miami know us for our work on Atala butterflies, which is a small hair streak. It's gorgeous, as you can see, which was almost completely gone from South Florida until people started really making an effort to replant their host plant, Kunti. And now you can even find it up in Central Florida, which was a feat we never imagined was going to be possible back when scientists were worried that they were completely extinct. And another project I'd love to highlight is we also work with the rarest bat in North America, the Florida bonneted bat. We're monitoring roosts both at the zoo as well as across Miami-Dade County to better understand their breeding habitat. This is another species which, similar to eastern bluebirds and brown-headed nuthatches, relied on red-cockaded woodpeckers to create natural cavities in the pine trees. Unfortunately, when we lost the red-cockaded woodpecker from South Florida, we also saw declines in those other species, including the Florida bonneted bat. It's really a privilege to have them on zoo grounds and get to participate in these different studies where we're trying to understand how they're genetically related to other bonneted bats in the state, or maybe a subspecies all their own. And what it is that they really need out of a pine rockland habitat and how we can provide better artificial roosts for them in the absence of the natural cavities that they would otherwise rely on. So I want to leave you all with hopefully some ideas of how to get involved if you are feeling like, wow, I never knew that zoos did all these things and I would love to do something. I really encourage you to look for outreach programs at your local zoological establishments. Find creative ways that you can contribute your talent. Most zoos run some sort of volunteering program as well, and we love our volunteer docents. So if you love talking to people and want to donate some of your time and energy on the weekends, zoos would love to have you. But there are also ways that you can connect with, for example, our conservation and research staff at these different establishments and see if maybe you have a talent that would be helpful to them. For example, having carpentry skills, really helpful when we're trying to build all of these roofs for bats. Also, definitely encourage you just to talk to the people at the zoo, talk to the keepers, engage in the keeper talks, just like going to a national park and talking to a ranger. Those are the folks who are really knowledgeable about the animal, and they love feeling valued by our guests. And sometimes it can lead to really great experiences. My first time I ever got to encounter one of my favorite birds in the world, the South African penguin, was by just talking to a keeper at Busch Gardens. And very fortunately, he decided to let me go backstage and meet some of their South African penguins, which was very exciting. And lastly, of course, continue volunteering with great organizations like your local Audubon chapter. These can connect you to cool opportunities. I know when I was in South Florida, Audubon was actually the way that I found out about Disney Conservation's work on purple martins, and continue to follow that work quite closely and try to collaborate with folks up there on purple martin research. And the connection that Audubon would facilitate was actually encouraging Audubon members to volunteer to actually talk to guests at Epcot during the Flower and Garden Festival about purple martins. So there are great opportunities to connect your passion for birding and this community that you're building at Orange with some of the critical conservation and research work that zoos are doing. So with that, I know we are at time exactly. I didn't leave a huge amount of space for questions, but I defer to our wonderful team. Do we have time to take a couple questions?
Sure.
Perfect.
All right, if you want to put, you can put your questions in the chat, or if you want to unmute it this time, you can ask it in person. Either way. I have one question. Poisonwood, is it the berries that they're eating, and are they poisonous?
Yes, they are ingesting the berries. Poisonwood, the tree overall, every part of the tree is coated in a toxin. So actually one of the things that we'll be having to do as we're working with white-crowned pigeons, because they'll just flap around in there and cover themselves in this toxin, they themselves can actually give you a rash. So we'll be wearing gloves and a lot of protective equipment as we handle pigeons as well in our banding work. But yes, they are eating the berries, and they're one of very few species that are known to be able to digest that fruit and actually use it for nutritional value.
Oh. Now, has there been quite a big increase? Because I know a few years I've gone a lot of times and couldn't see them, and then the last time I went, I don't know if I just hit the good day, but it seems like the top of every tree had a white-crowned pigeon in it.
Yeah, it does seem there have been some increases. They're certainly being reported much more frequently. They're being sighted in a lot more urban parks throughout Miami-Dade County, not as much of the kind of pristine habitats that you might expect. You actually find them quite commonly in urban areas now. So I do think there is some population increase going on. It's not clear what the driver of that is, but unfortunately, this species has just been critically understudied for most of the last couple of decades when that growth has been possible. There have been a lot of programs incentivizing Miami-Dade County residents to plant native hardwood hammock vegetation. So some scholars suspect that that could be part of it. We are creating habitat and they're moving into it. If you build it, they will come.
Very cool. All right, any other questions?
You can unmute yourself if you'd like.
You did a good job. Everybody feels pretty confident about everything.
All right. Now you all know what zoos are doing for bird conservation. I'm glad I've done my job.
Yeah, it's very
We'll
interesting.
have to investigate Central Florida Zoo. We've just had a program from them on their indigo snake conservation work, but we don't know much about their bird conservation work. We'll have to investigate.
Yeah, definitely look into it. A lot of zoos, I'm not sure if Central Florida specifically is, but there is a program under those SAFE programs that I mentioned before. There's actually an entire program dedicated to North American songbirds, where zoos all across the country are engaging in different efforts to protect our North American songbird population, and really taking, I think, an interesting kind of multi-pronged approach, addressing the drivers of their decline here, investing in habitat conservation and restoration through things like bird-friendly coffee in their wintering grounds in Central and South America, and of course, always educating the public about the importance of these songbirds for migratory connectivity. So yeah, check out a Central Florida Zoo is doing that. And if not, there are definitely other places. Jack Zoo is doing amazing work for songbirds. That might be a good future bird chat speaker if you've not connected with the Jacksonville Zoo folks.
Oh, we have another question. Melissa was asking, was that Parc de los Palomas, SJ,
Yeah.
and one in your background?
Yes, that is Parque Las Palomas. Yes. I don't have a picture of canopies full of white-crowned pigeons yet, but I'm trying to lean into the pigeon person identity as much as I can. And this is one of my favorite places to visit every time I go home, and certainly have a lot of fond memories there as a child.
Where is that? What town?
Yeah, so that's in San Juan.
Oh,
So
San
if you
Juan.
ever go to Viejo San Juan and you're exploring the historic district of Puerto Rico's capital, I definitely recommend it. It's a fun spot. There's a great little dive bar right across from it also. So it's fun for the whole family. You give the kids some pigeon peas to feed to the pigeons, and you go get yourself a mojito and enjoy looking out over the water through the gate there.
Cool.
Oh, and Melissa said she is from Puerto Rico.
Ah, fabulous. I love seeing more Boricuas on these calls. Great. Well, if there aren't more questions now, I did want to make sure you all have my contact information. Please feel free to use it. I would love to field any questions you have. If you're ever coming down to South Florida and are interested in visiting some of our projects or learning more about them, I would love to chat with you and make that happen. So please keep in touch. And if you just want to follow me on social media, you've got a couple options to do that on there as well. So thank you so much
Very
for
good.
listening to my spiel.
No, fantastic,
No.
Steffanie. It was great.
Yeah,
Thank
very
you so
good.
much. And night, everybody. We'll
Good
see you.
night, everybody.